Welcome to the Senior Living Sizzle, a conversation series where I, Christie Freeze, sit down with senior living experts to get their insights and thoughts on the industry's hottest topics. Let's get sizzling. Welcome, everyone, officially official to our first Senior Living Sizzle. We're going to be discussing strategies, best practices, tips, all things around lease-up and new development. But don't worry, even if you are not in a lease-up or new development stage, I think some of the things we're going to talk about today are going to land and be really impactful for you to start implementing into your own practices and process. So before we dive too deep, I want to just welcome Sydney Sumpter to the conversation. Sydney, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me. So excited for this.
We're super excited to have you. And let's do some quick introductions before we dive deep into this topic. So my name is Christie Freeze. If you don't know me, I am the Partnership Growth Manager here at Heart Legacy. And I was actually introduced to SalesMail, our flagship product, back in 2019, ironically, during my time leasing up a brand new construction. So I used the tool from sales trailer stage all the way through grand opening and beyond. And of course, huge fan of SalesMail, which is why I'm here today. But let's go ahead and hear from Sydney. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sydney. I'm from Tyler, Texas with Blake Management Group. The Blake at Tyler is a new development that actually just opened on July 1st. So I was able to utilize SalesMail from the time I started with the company in March of 2023 all the way up to the opening. And so I'm excited to talk about how it's been instrumental in acquiring all the beautiful faces that are now moving into our building.
That's the best part of having a new building is getting to, of course, build those relationships, but get to see them living in your community and getting to, see them every day. So that's awesome. Well, Sydney, let's talk first about community outreach. I think that's a good place to kind of start this conversation. And again, folks that are here joining us, be sure to drop your insights and things that have worked for you in the chat. This is an awesome opportunity for us all to learn from one another. But I'm really curious, Sydney, what was kind of like the first steps? Let's kind of start at the beginning. What was kind of your first plan of attack when you were building that community outreach piece?
Yeah, sure. So I was the only one that was hired with the Blake for the first 6 months that we were technically, pre-operational. And a huge part of that was just getting the word out about who we are. Our building's been under construction for a year, but no one really knew what service lines we provided or really what we were bringing to the Tyler community. So I basically started from a blank slate, and it's a lot easier to get people's contact information in the world we live in today than it is sometimes to schedule in-person meetings. So that's what SalesMail really helped me do toward the beginning, was if I could just get their basic email or their phone number, being able to introduce myself, put a name with a contact piece of information to then be able to get in front of them without actually getting in front of them, really helped me advertise at, very low budget, and also move the needle a little bit forward on getting those key meetings with partners and then maintaining those relationships over the course of a year.
I love that. So I know when I was in this stage, I was doing the lease-up, I found a ton of value in educating outside of the healthcare space. Have you noticed the same? And what maybe outlets have you tapped into as far as like chambers or networking events or things like that?
Oh, yeah. So per my company's, policy, it was always good to get in with the Tyler Chamber of Commerce or whatever city I was in at the time. So part of that was, yes, kind of the networking groups, better business bureaus, different things like that, where you can get in front of a lot of different people in different industries at the same time. But even focusing on like a specific niche of some sort that I knew would end up being a part of my senior living industry kind of inner circle. So like pastors was a big deal here in Tyler, Texas. Being in the Bible Belt, maintaining those relationships eventually led to, by the time that we opened, we had this massive event where it was like a pastor's prayer breakfast. And I had built so much, rapport with all the local churches that we already had those relationships to kick off that breakfast before we opened. So that was really, really helpful and beneficial.
That is amazing. That's an awesome example. And I think it's just important too for our audience and those that are listening, to really think about not just necessarily how do we get prospects, but who is already in front of our prospects before we have any idea that they even exist. So, I think, leveraging churches and the community
just in general, those folks are going to reach out to their trusted advisors, which in your case, pastors, right? Really just the church family and environment fosters those types of discussions and conversations before they would ever say, hey, I think I should look at a senior living community.
Yes.
So I'm also curious about just education. I know when I was in this space, I was doing a lot of the like lunch and learns or events that just provided baseline senior care, senior living knowledge and education. Is that something that you all have done as well?
Yes. So that was probably my biggest hit in getting more leads into my database or even more education to the community for referral partners was hosting what we called our Dine and Discovers. So every single month we had a central location. Typically it was a very well-known restaurant here in Tyler that had a good presentation space that we could bring in groups of people, typically just prospects or just referral partners, to go through a simple presentation that educated them on what we were planning to bring to the community and how we could partner in the future or what we could do for them now. So that was a really big, I would say the best opportunity we had to communicate like our Founders Club, our Rose Club, early incentives to get signed up. Because then once they were like, ooh, we want to be a part of what the Blake is doing now, it put that whole, it could be a year before I could move in, more into perspective of like, I'm actually just going to join the journey with the Blake. So luckily by the time we opened our building, like we had lots of people still signed up, maybe even from a year and a half before, because the retention piece was already in place through all those things that we were hosting throughout the year.
Yes, that's so good. And I feel like with anything, right? Senior living decision or other big decisions, it's so impactful to be a part of the process. You feel like you have ownership in it. You're really bought in. We called them gold key members. And so everyone that moved in had a gold key on their door. And then those folks that came in after the gold key, program was over was like, oh, how'd you get that? Were you a part of this before it, even existed? So I really, really love that. And, you mentioned something also about referral partners. I think that's something too that in general, I think sometimes we often just think of like a place for momandcaring.com, but I'm curious if there's any other referral partners that you found to be really helpful and impactful, in this process.
Absolutely. I actually don't utilize like any like place for momandcaring.com. And so I'd say probably my best referral partners have come from a couple of different areas, but one in particular to focus on, because they have just been so helpful, is sitter companies and home health throughout the last year. And the reason why is a lot of the people who signed up maybe a year ago, like it's just the nature of our industry that there's going to be some decline, especially if they're living in the home. Maybe they don't have a lot of support from family. And so physically or cognitively, they're declining. So before they can actually get to the Blake, if the Blake is the place they wanted to be, the sitter companies that we were partnered with or the home health were able to go inside the home and help them be able to remain there until they could move into the Blake once we finally opened. But once we had those working relationships and we knew that they were doing a great job with our people, they were also talking to other clients that they had at the time about, hey, well, the Blake's opening and this is what they're going to be able to provide. So it translated to so many new leads and even new depositors for us that I wouldn't have necessarily been able to meet otherwise.
I love that. They're kind of like the bridge, right? Between staying at home and coming to a community. And I think that's super important to note that, oftentimes, whether your community is open or not, it might not be the right time for somebody. And that's totally okay. I think the, important thing to keep in mind is educating, showing up like you are in all of those, really impactful ways of just, hey, this is who we are. And these are the service lines we're going to offer. This is what it might look like for somebody that you are working with to live here with us. So that's super awesome. Are there any other referral partners? I know you said there was a few. Are there any other maybe outside healthcare that have been helpful for you?
Yes. Well, outside healthcare, I was thinking of another one that I had not thought of in a previous job, but even like lab companies, like mobile labs, we started getting creative about resources we could bring into the community. So that could include a lot of different things that people can get creative with, but kind of outside the box of people that could be assisting our residents, that we could already be working those relationships before we even open the building.
I love that. Yeah, one of the examples I shared in some of the teaser videos leading up to this conversation was around financial planners. I think financial planners, mortgage folks, real estate folks,
Mhm.
anybody that, typically works with somebody for many years. It's not necessarily like a one and done type of a thing. Those are the people that, families are turning to in a time of decline or crisis, saying, hey, what am I supposed to do right now? And so to have those relationships already built, huge to have that pathway already existing, and then can kind of insert, the best solution for them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now I'm curious around, and let's start at the beginning. So those brand new depositors that didn't even have a building to look at or, imagine. I'm super curious, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about sales mail, but I'm curious as to the other ways that you've really kept those depositors engaged, especially at the, those that deposited at the beginning and maybe did have to wait a year. I'm super curious on that.
I would say it was a learning curve for me because I had previously served in a building that had already been open for a couple of years. And so this was brand new. I had great support from my company from their other buildings that have opened. Like, these are things that have worked. These are things that didn't. But just every community, especially like every city, is a little bit different. So I had to learn my people and what was really working for them based on who they were and what they needed. So I would say like building those relationships and building trust was the key to continuing to foster that interest and desire to be at the Blake. So everyone looked a little bit different. Some people really did need a text like every other day that was like, hey, here's something else we just found out about construction. These beams just went up today, with a little picture. Some people were really in it for the meals every single month. So we'd get together with our Founders Club members or our Rose Club and just talk about these have been progressions in the staff that we've hired, progressions in the building itself. Here are some new things that you can tell your friends about the Blake and what we're bringing. So I think that more than anything, it was about those relationships and learning like what people were needing at that moment. Like, did they need reassurance that the care was going to be excellent and worth waiting for? Or did they just need someone to tell them like how exciting it's going to be and how much different their life's going to be from a social standpoint? So learning your people and then meeting those needs as they also evolve and change throughout the year.
I love that. We talk a lot about, just in this industry, we talk a lot about person-centered care and how valuable really keeping that person or prospect or resident really just people first, and everyone is different. Everyone is unique. And so being able to, just like you said, meet their needs and, really just nurture them in a way that is most effective for them. Mm-hmm. So I really love that. And one of the things that popped into my mind as you were just saying that is I'm super curious if there are any groups that have formed within that Founders Club, so like, the greatest part about going to a senior living community is you have tons of friends that are going to wait for you there, and you have that social aspect. So did you see that having those dinners and having those events started to build that group of community earlier?
Definitely. And actually, some of our original depositors from maybe like a year or two ago were the ones that moved in together in the same week. And so like they know they're their own little group, but instead of it be like a separation thing, I've seen it evolve into like those became my ambassadors for the community. The first ones walking down doing the red carpet welcome as we're having all of these move-ins. And they're like, let me tell you about the Blake from the beginning. And because I've developed that trust with them and that dependence of we're going to get what we're paying for, we're going to get our expectations met, then they're able to then kind of a friend-to-friend referral, talk to other people coming in and be like, you can trust these people because this has been my journey with them for a year and a half, not just the month that they've been living with us, but all of the weeks in between that we were anxiously anticipating the opening.
I know, it's like the most exciting time. I remember I had a similar journey where I started in the sales trailer and there was no building. And I was very fortunate in Indiana to have a sister community that was about 45 minutes away. So I would be able to go and at least show them some type of, similarity of what that building and community would look like. But it was very difficult to essentially sell something that doesn't yet exist. And ultimately what you're selling, right, is yourself and your commitment to meeting those expectations. Something that we talked about when we were just preparing for this conversation, and it stuck out to me, and you were just talking about authenticity. So I would love if you could unpack just the power of that for us.
I've always taken that approach to like selling, because in senior living, like it's different than selling like a product to someone. Like you're selling a lifestyle and somewhere that you would hope someone would enjoy to spend the rest of their days here on earth with us with. And so it's much more personal and intimate, and something that you don't want to just, say all of these words and then them not get what they expect once they move in. So very seriously, the authenticity piece of making sure that what you're sharing is true, but then also you're being your true authentic self in that. Because I really do believe that if you've been hired by your company to do this job, like there's a reason. It's something that's in your personality. It's something that's in your skill set that's already there. And so trusting yourself that by doing what you would normally do in a conversation and like listening to your intuition and your empathy, that would lead to the proper connection if that person's meant to be there. So even in sales mails, I know we talked about this. I'm a big fan of when I'm recording and like, let's say something tragic happens on camera, like you kind of have to pick and choose what you send out. But I have found that when I'm sending out sales mails, the more personal I can make it and authentic, even if that means like the other day I tripped in our garden and I just like, I left it in there. And it wasn't because it had already been 2 minutes and I did not want to redo it. It's because I was like, okay, that's kind of funny. Like that'll make people laugh. I got the best response to that. Like I had like 75 people watch it, and I want to say like 7 or 8 people schedule a tour. And so people like authenticity and like real life things that happen, because they're like, oh, this person's down to earth. Like they're just not feeding me some sales pitch that their company helped tailor and get to the point where it would sell me. Like, no, this is a real person. So I really do lean on the side of the more myself I am, like the more things will happen as they should.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so good. And I love that example about tripping in the garden. I often send sales mails where I'm like looking into the abyss for my words, or perhaps I've tripped over my words. And to your point, the more real and authentic you can show up, the better someone on the other end is going to feel, right? We also, as humans, do not want necessarily to connect with perfection because we can't see ourselves in that. So it's really important that we do show up as our authentic selves, as we are. And I like what you said too, Sydney, about if you were hired to be in this role, that's first of all, like the greatest gift. I'm a little biased because my current role is my favorite thing ever right now. But when I was a sales director, it really felt like I had the best job ever. I was like, I don't have to, I get to connect with the community. I get to educate this city or this county or wherever it was that I was representing, and show them that senior living can be a lot different than they've possibly, preconceived in their mind. I think a lot of what we're doing is really just like breaking down old beliefs of what senior living is and what it has to offer. And so when we can do it in a really authentic way through tools like sales mail, yes, but even just being able to have these dine and discover, I love that. I love that way more than lunch and learn. So I think that's a really fun takeaway for folks. And I know we're going to get to some questions. I saw some pop up in the chat. I know we're going to get to those here in just a minute, but is there anything else that you really feel is important to add, or that you would really want folks that are in this stage of the process, perhaps their building's not open yet, is there anything that you would really want them to know or to do?
Well, I hadn't planned to say this, but I'm going to say this now. I think patience is like the biggest virtue in our industry for a lot of different reasons. Patience in the pre-opening phase for me, like, was tough. Like, I'm not going to lie, that last 6 months, like,
you were like, let's go.
I was like, come on, let's get this thing open. But I think patience, even with people, I have found that if I'm in a conversation with someone and I just don't feel like it's going the way that I want it to go for whatever reason, like I just know that this person would really benefit from our services, or I really want to get a hold of them and I can't. Patience goes so far, especially with these people that are making such life-altering decisions that they're uncertain of, but you really want it to be their true decision, is oftentimes the thing that comes back like with the greatest return for me. Because even like if I'm waiting on someone to call me back, or I'm waiting for this person to get to a point of readiness, like it was because I was kind in that season of patience that led to me really being able to help that family or help that person. So that paired with authenticity has gone a really long way for me, and not just knowing when to help people, but knowing how to help people the best, which I think is why we're all here in the first place.
You're absolutely right. And I love that you didn't plan to share that, but did, because I think that is a very authentic offer for everyone. Sydney's like the queen of authenticity, folks. So I love that. Okay, so we have about 8 minutes left. I would love to hear, Abby, I know there's been some questions in the chat. I've kind of lost some of them with all of the hearts, which we will gladly accept. Thank you all so much for that. But I'm also curious, if there's anybody in the audience that's listening that has any other things that have worked really well for them in this lease-up stage, whether it be pre-lease, once we're at grand opening, beyond, nurturing depositors. I'm really curious if there's any feedback in that area. My question was, how do you get the leads to do those dinners?
Oh, that's a good question. So some of the leads that I already had in my database that I was sending like email invitations out to, or, cold calls out, would you like to attend this next Dine and Discover? Those work to a degree, but my biggest success with getting people to show up at Dine and Discovers were direct mail campaigns. So sending to people's homes, more of the nature of join us for this free complimentary meal and learn a little bit more about the senior living community coming to this area. And so that's how I acquired the most new leads. And then just being willing to sit down and cold call and connect with people. How are you doing? Don't jump straight to the invitation, but then getting them there typically led to more of the relationship being developed.
Steve said you have to know your audience. Not everyone in senior living is going to be online for an email. Love that you went back to old school direct mail. That's great feedback.
Yep.
Yeah, and there is no more emotional sale than senior living, for sure. This is something I've talked about on my LinkedIn a few times, where it's actually just a networking group that I became a part of very early in just my senior living career. And it was all people that were not in my industry. So initially I was like, what am I doing here? But what I learned is that I had an opportunity. That group met weekly for an hour and a half. It was very, very strategic, very intentional. And it was all of the people that we've been talking about, right? Financial advisors, home care folks, mortgage people, honestly, even folks in the trades. I have a roofer, ironically, in my group right now who has sent me 2 Parkinson's referrals. I'm on the board for the Indiana Parkinson Foundation. So I'm always, asking, if you come across somebody that's navigating that disease, let me know so I can get them connected. And the roofer in my networking group said, you would be so surprised at how many older folks have no one to talk to. And then he goes and he hears their whole life story and hears that they're struggling, or hears that they can't do XYZ because they have to go to the doctor, And so I think it's really important to educate everywhere, all of the time. We both are educating folks on what senior living is, but we're also painting a new picture of what this industry is. In the town and the county that I was doing my Lease-Up, it was like one of only 2 communities that they had ever had. And in their mind, they thought that it was going to be like 40 years ago senior living, where there's like long, dark, scary hallways and people are like, it's very intense, and it's completely different. Yes, those types of offerings still exist perhaps, but the way of the future and the way of now is community and lifestyle based. And I've checked out the Blake at Tyler's website and the virtual tours that I was able to see, and I'm sure you feel the same way, but when I was opening my community, I was like, I would move in here today. So,
thank you. Can I give Sales Mail one specific shout out that's worked recently?
Yes, you can. Of course you can.
Okay, let me do this real quick. So, y'all know, y'all are all salespeople. There's like an ebb and flow, throughout the year of sometimes it's just a dry season and sometimes it's fast paced and you can't even keep up with everything. So I think it was a couple months ago, maybe in April, like even though we were just about to open, I could not get people to come and tour. Like I had all of these pre-tours and then like some, beginning tours of the new building, and I just couldn't get anything in the schedule. And I was so frustrated. I was struggling with patience, and I had done like cold calls throughout the whole database. I was making like 50 calls a day. I was doing home visits. I was sending like handwritten letters, emails, they weren't working. So I was like, I'm just going to record a sales mail and it's going to be flashy. And I'm just going to send it out to my whole database. And I'm going to put in all caps, like, watch this video. I got like 300 something views on that video, and it translated to like I want to say 20 to 30 something tours maybe that came out of that. And so if you ever find yourself in a place where you just cannot get things going, sales mail has been like what I have leaned on to get me what I'm looking for. And it really does bring people who maybe were cold leads back up to considering or even depositors. It works every single time.
I love that.
Yeah.
Listen, I didn't even prepare her to say that, guys. I will say this, though, because we did talk about this in our prep for this, and you shared something that I think would be, what does flashy mean?
Okay. So
great question. Yeah, I'm curious.
By flashy, I meant more like I had the building in the background. I had signs in the background saying like now open. I changed the filter to be a little bit more bright. And so I made sure that the original panel, like when you first opened the sales mail, was like you could see everything about the Blake with the sign. So less like a personal video in your office, more of the what you'd see on like the marketing page of your website.
I love that. That's awesome. So I know we're coming up on time, but if you can condense this for us, because you shared something with me when we were prepping around, you had used sales mail in the past and you were a little resistant and hesitant. And then you got to the Blake and you leaned in and you saw a ton of success. And so I would love if you could share any tips for people that are maybe a little hesitant or worried about making a sales mail.
I will be transparent and tell you in my last role, I refused to use sales mail because every time I turned on the video, I was like, is that what I sound like? And my eyes do weird things and all this stuff. I was just like, I'm just not going to do this. So finally in this next role, I was like, I don't really have a choice because I need new things to give to my people to show them when I didn't really have like a building to bring them into. So it was the best decision I ever made. I ended up sending like videos that normally like I would be embarrassed by just out, maybe like one or two people. And those are the ones that got the best responses on. So lean in even when you don't feel confident or comfortable because it will benefit you and it will benefit your company.
I love that. Okay, one last quick question I just saw in here. How frequently are you touching base with prospects during your lease-up process? Sounds like it might be unique to each prospect.
It is, and depending, usually companies kind of have policies on that. It really does depend on who it is. I would say hot leads almost every day or every other day, cold leads once a month or once every 2 weeks, warm leads once a week. And that's just what I try to keep to, but I can do like a little bit more or less as needed.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. I can't believe how fast that went, but I want to have a huge, huge, huge thank you to Sydney for joining us for our first Senior Living Sizzle. Thank you all so much for being here for the conversation. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to learn a little bit more about Lease-Up. And again, Sydney, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for tuning into this conversation brought to you by Heart Legacy, home to Senior Living's #1 video tool, Sales Mail. Book more tours, win more leases, and ultimately build stronger connections with personalized video from Sales Mail by Heart Legacy. If you'd like to join us for the next live Senior Living Sizzle, you can click the link at the top of the description below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.